came a long way from St. Louis. You climbed the ladder of success. I've seen the flashy foreign cars that were parked out in front of your fancy address. You came a long way from St. Louis. You broke a lot of hearts between.
Thank you, Perry Como, for our Show Me State theme song. And thank you for being in the YouTube audience for yet another edition of the Radioactive Take. I'm Bryan Styble, longtime commercial news talk radio host, now doing the YouTube thing. And yeah, I'd rather be on the radio, but this is increasingly an invigorating exercise in communication, and I'm so delighted to have you tuning in here, and we'll hope to make it worth your while here on the Monday, August 21st edition in 2023 of the Radioactive Take. And today, while everybody else is talking about how Hurricane Hillary fizzled out there in California, and that's a good thing, a lot of rain, but not too many hurricane winds that they had to deal with, and good for them. And people are also talking about Biden's presidential visit to the aftermath of Maui. Good luck to him for that, along with First Lady Jill as they tour the scenes of devastation out there. And people are also talking about Trump and how he's boycotting the Republican debates. All of them, he says. Certainly this one Wednesday in Milwaukee, he's not going to be making an appearance for, and therefore maybe some of the other candidates will get a word in edgewise as a result. We'll see how that goes. But while they're talking about that all across America, those things, I'm going to be talking about something completely different. How about total eclipses of the sun on this edition of the Radioactive Take? And you might say, why that? Well, because it's August 21st. There we are, pointing directly at the date. And August 21st in 2017 was the eclipse across America, as they called it. It started, that total eclipse of the sun, out there in Oregon and swept all across the lower 48, finishing its American passage there in South Carolina. And my original intent was to witness it from my hometown of St. Louis. But that didn't work out. Even though my father's grave at Jefferson Memorial Cemetery there is in the path of totality that it passed through, it was clouded in that day, mostly over St. Louis. So I had to scoot east quite a few hours to witness it from Kentucky, and I did. And it was an experience, although not quite, at least as lengthy an experience as the first total eclipse of the sun I saw, and that was down in Cabo San Lucas at the very tip of Baja California there in Mexico, down on what I was calling for the whole week I was down there, the Tropic of Skin Cancer. Got a lot of mileage out of that joke. And it's more than an experience, a total eclipse of the sun is. It's, well, what attorneys call sui generis. There's nothing else like it in life on this planet. And in fact, as far as astronomers know, there's nothing like it anywhere else in the universe. Total eclipses of the sun are unique to our planet. There's lots of moons out there. There's well over, I think the count's up to more than 100, something like 120, 130 moons. A lot of them are tiny moons, and most of them are circling about Saturn and Jupiter and Uranus. Quite a few around Neptune as well, and even 5. Now we know that there are 5 that orbit Pluto, and a couple tiny ones that orbit Mars, but none that orbit Mercury or Venus as far as we know, and we know pretty far in that regard. We're pretty sure there are no moons around the first two so-called terrestrial planets. But we've got one moon, and it happens to be, by utter coincidence, maybe not by coincidence, maybe God decided to give us Earthlings a special treat by situating the moon in its orbit precisely such that the disk of the moon is perceived from Earth as precisely the size of the disk of the sun, which of course is 93 million miles away and is about 800,000 miles in diameter. But because it's 400 times closer, the moon is, than the sun, they appear to be all but identical in size. And that's why we have total eclipses of the sun. Not very many of them. We much more frequently have a total eclipse of the moon, as this photograph, which will finally make sense to you here. This is a photograph of a total eclipse of the moon when it turns, as they say, blood red. That's due to certain atmospheric effects on Earth that the sunlight shining through the Earth's atmosphere and then being projected onto the moon causes. But lunar eclipses, just about everybody's seen, because half of the world, the night side of the world, can see a total eclipse of the moon when it happens. And they can only happen during full moons. I don't know if you knew that. If you took some basic astronomy course in high school or college like I did, you would know that. Actually, I knew that before that. I've been a fan of eclipses long before I even saw a lunar eclipse. I was reading about eclipses of the moon and the sun when I was 8, 9, 10 years old back in St. Louis. But I didn't witness a total eclipse of the sun until 1991, when I flew down from Los Angeles with my lady friend of those days to Cabo San Lucas. And it was quite an experience. And the whole point of this edition of the Radioactive Take is to try to inspire you to see your own total eclipse of the sun coming up in April. It's only, I believe, 430 days, precisely 230 days from today. It's going to be on Monday, another Monday total eclipse of the sun. The one in 2017 was on a Monday. This one will be on a Monday as well. April 8th, 2024, right around the corner. And I aim over the next few minutes to explain to you why you're really selling yourself short if you don't do whatever you have to do to fly or drive, as I'm going to the path of totality when it sweeps across America from the West Coast, from Texas. It's coming up through Mexico. That's what it's doing. The one in 2017 was called the eclipse across America because it went straight across the lower 48 and hit quite a few of those lower 48. But this one's going to have a smaller path in terms of the number of states it hits. It's going to enter America by passing over Texas and then go through, Arkansas and again Missouri, just like the 2017 one did. And it's going to go through Indiana, I guess, and then go right over Buffalo. They don't often occur over major cities, but Buffalo will enjoy it. Anybody that's outside to witness it on the 8th of April, that Monday coming up in 2024, just 230 days away from today. And the last people stateside in the United States to be able to witness it will be up in Maine. So it's going to hit quite a few states, but not as many as the one in 2017 did. This one's being called the Great American Eclipse, and you really owe it to yourself to experience what I have now twice and hope to live to see a third time. I actually may even live to see a fourth one, I should say, if I make it to age 90 and see the one that's going to happen in August of 2045. And I am trying to live to 100, but the odds are against me. In fact, the odds are against me even making it to 90. So I don't want to miss this one and have no intention of missing it. We'll see if I'm still healthy enough to drive there, as I plan on doing. There being Cape Girardeau, Missouri, Rush Limbaugh's hometown, oddly enough, is where this one's going to pass through. And in fact, it passed through. The 2017 one did through or over Cape Girardeau as well. Cape Girardeau is in what they call the boot heel of America. The boot heel so-called because it looks like the heel of a boot. And it's in the extreme southeast corner of the Show Me State. And that's where they're going to enjoy their second total eclipse of the sun in the space of 7 years. That is very, very unusual. It's not unusual that total eclipses of the sun happen. There's one somewhere on the planet pretty much every year, very often a second one even, but they're dispersed in such faraway places, very often Alaska or Antarctica, such that most people can never get to them. But I got to that one down in Mexico, as did the Seattle Astronomy Club. People that years later, when I was propagating conversation at the speed of light over Cairo, Seattle, not Cairo, Egypt. When I was on the radio at Cairo, I had several members at different points of my tenure up there on the broadcast talking about eclipses in general and astronomy in particular. Or let's flip that around. Astronomy in general and eclipses in particular, and solar eclipses in special particularity, because those astronomy guys that were down from Seattle with us in Mexico, I didn't go down there with them, but I happened to run into them when they were staying at the same hotel that I and my lady friend were. And they take these things very seriously. They had several fancy telescopes up on the roof of the hotel along with us, and they were telling me stories that were fascinating because these were people known as eclipse chasers. These were people that in a couple of instances weren't on their first total eclipse of the sun like I was, but having seen 5, 6, 7, one person I think was on his 10th total eclipse of the sun. And to do that, you got to fly all over the world, sometimes into rather hostile places on the globe, but that's how attractive to people that know what they're all about total eclipses of the sun are. And that's what I aim to explain to you here in the course of telling you a couple of stories. The first story has to do with my lady friend in Los Angeles, who was originally not going to fly down to Cabo San Lucas to the Tropic of Skin Cancer with me. She was encouraging me to go. She wasn't trying to discourage me to go at all, but she was not enthusiastic about it. But I kept talking it up for months, and finally I came home from work one day, and she said, "I've got the glass." I said, "What glass are you talking about?" She said, "Well, I've been researching these eclipses you've been telling me all about, and it turns out to get the optimum viewing of a total eclipse of the sun, you need a certain grade of welder's glass." And she called up a welder supply company and got them and surprised me with them. And that indeed is what we were looking at the eclipse with. We didn't have the big helmet on. That would have made quite a sight there on the roof of that hotel in Cabo San Lucas. But no, we did have the glass, and we were looking skyward through them for a full 6 minutes and 56 seconds of totality, which astronomically is only 10 seconds shy of the maximum a total eclipse of the sun can ever be. Well, that's one of the reasons Newsweek called that 1991 total eclipse of the sun the lucky 7/11 eclipse. They called it lucky 7/11 because it was on July 11th, a Thursday. And it really was quite an experience. Again, my friend, who was not enthusiastic for months, became enthusiastic as soon as she bought those panes of welder's glass. And by the time we got down there, she was as jazzed about this as I was. And I was so glad that, by the way, the reason she was able to come is she not only got the glass, procured the welder's glass, but also called my travel agent and saw if she could get an add-on to the package I had already bought. And there was that possibility, so she went and bought the ticket herself right then and there and flew down to Mexico with me. But when we got down there on the Sunday preceding the eclipse, well, unfortunately, our fortunes had not been realized, because all of a sudden, even though we searched projected the annual average atmospheric conditions for Cabo San Lucas in August, and they said, in July, and they said that you're going to get probably totally clear skies. And indeed, the other place we were thinking about going instead, which was Hawaii, the Big Island, where it also could be seen that 11th of July in 1991. So happened that the weather conditions over the years, the average weather conditions for July on the Big Island were telling us that there was a darn good chance we were going to encounter clouds. So that was one reason not to go to Hawaii. But there was another reason that was really what made Hawaii out of the question for me. And that was the fact that it was happening at 9 a.m. You had to look at it on the horizon. And here, this guy who had been reading about total eclipses of the sun as a child, well, I always imagined to be looking straight up, neck-strainingly straight up. So I wasn't going to go for that thing on the horizon. So I said, no way for Hawaii. We're going to Mexico, especially since the weather's almost certainly going to be much better down there. Much smaller chance of having cloud cover. Except that when we arrived on Sunday, before the eclipse on Thursday, it was clouded in. The tip of Baja California was. And the next day, Monday, same thing. And Tuesday, same thing. And by this point, she wasn't saying so, but I bet you she was thinking so. Man, what did he get me into? We spend all this money, go to all this trouble, and it's going to be clouded in anyway? Well, on Wednesday, she was probably even more of that mindset, because on Wednesday, it wasn't just clouded in, it was raining. But somehow, maybe God was on our side, and the guy who wrote that lyric, with God on our side, I'm talking about Mr. Dylan. We talk about him from time to time on this narrowcast we call the Radioactive Take. You know that lyric of Dylan's? It opens up the song, "It's All Right, Ma, I'm Only Bleeding." Do you know that song? If not, here's the opening. I won't do my Dylan impression. It's not any good anyway. But some people say Dylan's not any good as a singer, but I'm not one of those. Here's how Dylan opens up, "It's all right, Ma, I'm only bleeding." Darkness at the break of noon, shadows even the silver spoon, the handmade blade, the child's balloon, eclipses both the sun and moon. You understand, you know too soon, there is no sense in trying. Well, what I'm trying to express to you here is that total eclipses of the sun are a sight to behold. And sure enough, God was on our side that next day, that Thursday, because there wasn't a cloud in the, well, that's an exaggeration. There was a cloud in the sky, but just one, and it was a pretty small one, and it wasn't covering the sun or the moon, which soon enough would cover the sun's image. No, we had pretty much blue skies over Cabo San Lucas on the 11th of July, 1991, and we were therefore able to behold the full majesty of a total eclipse of the sun. And what those astronomer guys down from Seattle were telling me in anticipation of this in the few days while we were hanging around the hotel hoping that the skies would clear up, and they did. What they were telling me was that every total eclipse of the sun is different, or at least slightly different. You get different colors depending on how many flares are active on the sun at that particular time. You'll get different atmospheric conditions. I don't mean atmospheric conditions on Earth. I mean atmospheric conditions in the sun's atmosphere, also known as the corona. And that's the only time you can see the corona of the sun with the naked eye. You can see it, and they photograph it frequently, but with artificial means. To see it with the naked eye, the corona can only be seen during a total eclipse of the sun. And in fact, that's the only time it's safe to look at the sun. Any other time, you better have something akin to welder's glass to be peering through. And we were peering through leading up to the 6 minutes and 56 seconds of totality which we had. And again, the most you can ever have, given the orbits of the Earth and the sun, the orbits of the Earth and the moon around the sun, the most you can ever have is 7 minutes and 6 seconds, and we had 6 minutes and 56 seconds, and it was arguably the most glorious 6 minutes and 56 seconds of my 68 years, except that I had another 2 minutes and 14 seconds there for the Great American Eclipse. The eclipse across America. The one coming up in April of 2024 is the Great American Eclipse. I'm getting all my total eclipses mixed up. And I shouldn't, because again, like those astronomers from Seattle said, everyone is different. And indeed, the one that I witnessed from Kentucky on the 17th of August, the 21st of August in 2017, getting my digits mixed up there too. The one I witnessed in Kentucky on the 21st of August, 6 years ago today, was indeed rather different than that one I saw down in Mexico. And it's all due to whatever specific conditions are occurring on the sun at the time. The sun is a very active star, as all stars are. And that affects how a total eclipse of the sun is perceived here on Earth. And these eclipse chasers we were sharing the hotel with down in Mexico, they explained that to me. And they said, this one may or may not be a great one. I've seen a couple of great ones, and I've seen a couple that weren't so dazzling. We'll see what happens on Thursday, if the skies clear, as they did. And as it happened, in Mexico there, the corona, which usually appears as a pale yellow, I kid you not, was pink. Certainly the solar flares, there were a couple of prominent solar flares ongoing there in July of 1991, and they had a decided pink tone to them, hue to them, whichever is the correct term, and even the corona was somewhat pink. Although a couple of the other people I talked to about after the fact, they said they didn't see it as pink, but I saw it as pink. Maybe because pink's my favorite color. I don't know. But what is remarkable about what happened there in Mexico was my lady friend, who again was not enthusiastic until she bought the welder's glass, she was blown away by it and talked about it endlessly for the entire trip back to Los Angeles. That's the one anecdote I wanted to relate to you, but I said there were two. The other one is this fellow who, by coincidence, happened to be from Seattle. I hooked up with him in Los Angeles. We were roommates. He was a guy that went to L.A., like so many other people do, to be a star in the music world, rock and roller. But he ended up minor star in the movies as an extra, but as a frequently working extra. And this fellow, who by the time the 2017 eclipse rolled around, he was back in Seattle, and I was down here in Florida by then. But I kept calling him up saying, you don't want to miss the total eclipse of the sun, and you don't have to travel that far. Heck, I'm going all the way to Missouri to see it. Although, again, that didn't turn out because it was clouded over my father's grave, so I ended up in Kentucky. But I did go back to Missouri. But this pal of mine from Seattle, all he had to do was travel to Oregon, an adjacent state, or to Idaho, another adjacent state. So I kept after him. Every 2 or 3 weeks we'd talk, and I'd say, come on, get it together, do what you have to do. And this guy's not into astronomy. And he also, I think, is rather dubious about a lot of the things I say. He thinks I've got a reputation for exaggeration. And I don't. I just tell a lot of stories that sound like they're exaggerated. But anything you hear on the radioactive take and anything he heard from me in conversation was pretty much as it happened. I try not to exaggerate because I'm such an effusive speaker anyway. It doesn't need embellishment, anything I say. So I said, look, do what you have to, but don't miss the eclipse. You'll be thanking me afterward. And I even upped the ante a little bit by calling his lady friend and talking to her about it. And she was excited about the prospect. So maybe she's the one that talked him into it, not me. But in any case, they ended up traveling from Seattle to Idaho, as it turned out, to the path of totality. And more than a couple of days after the total eclipse of the sun on August 21st, 2017. Don't want to mix this 21 and the 21 and 20. It's 2117, August 21st, that this great American eclipse occurred. You may have witnessed it. I mean, it was in enough states. But if you didn't, I'm directing these comments to you here on YouTube, trying to inspire you just like I was trying to inspire my friend in Seattle. And again, maybe his girlfriend is the one that persuaded him that this was not to be missed. But they got to Idaho, they saw it, and then about a week later, I got back to Florida here, and he was back in Seattle probably the next day. Anyway, he calls me up, and he says the following. He says, Bryan, first of all, thank you for persuading me that this was worth seeing. And secondly, I was so impressed by it, I will fly anywhere on the planet to see another one. That's what he said, and it sounded like he meant it. Only he won't have to fly anywhere on the planet. He'll only have to drive somewhere in the United States, like Missouri, and I hope he comes to Missouri. I hope to hook up with him in St. Louis. I even offered to drive him down to Cape Girardeau to the boot heel. And the reason he ought to go to St. Louis is because his late mother happens to be from St. Louis. My late mother is from St. Louis, too, so we got that in common. And now we got a total eclipse of the sun in common. And, well, I'm telling you, as a viewer of the radioactive take it from that Styble guy. Just like I told my friend in Seattle, I'm telling you, you don't want to miss this one. And you're going to have a lot of opportunities because it's going to start in Texas. But you got to be quick because it's quick. It crosses the Earth, the shadow does, at no less than about 1,800 miles an hour. So it only lasts for about an hour and a half, 2 hours, whatever, depending on, again, where the orbit of the moon is and all the rest. A lot of factors conspire to make it precisely predictable as to where the path of totality is going to pass. And they don't just do it for the next or the next couple total eclipses of the sun. They've got them charted out, I believe, about 1,000 years into the future, at least. That's how specific the astronomers that keep track of these things can crunch those numbers and know exactly where it's going to be. So get yourself into that path of totality, and it's usually only about 30 or 40 miles wide, but it's going to go through Cape Girardeau. And in fact, the last time I talked to Rush Limbaugh on the air, I was on his show about 5 or 6 times on Open Line Friday, but the final time I talked to him, I was talking to him about this eclipse. And this, of course, was, not of course, but it was it was well into his fatal illness of lung cancer, and it was several months before he died. But to try to give him a little encouragement or even incentive to live a lot longer, I talked to him on the air on the show about how I intended to be there in Cape Girardeau and hope to watch it over, just like I wasn't able to with my father's grave. I hope to watch it from Rush Limbaugh's grave. Can't watch it as Rush Limbaugh the second's grave. There were 3 Rush Limbaughs. His grandfather, Rush Limbaugh the first, is buried in Cape Girardeau, and his father, Rush Limbaugh the second, who died fairly young. His mother lived to a grand old age, but Rush Limbaugh, the Rush Limbaugh we all know and listen to, if you're into that sort of thing, and I hope you are. I mean, that's why we do the talk radio thing here at WBQS, because I am into talk radio. Incredibly so, if you knew my lifestyle. I mean, I've always got it on. I listen to talk radio instead of watching television. And I told him I looked forward to being able to stand on his father's grave in Cape Girardeau and watch it along with Rush if he made it to Cape Girardeau. And he had a private jet. He could have easily done so. Of course, he died long before this 2024 eclipse happened, but I said that to him on the air about 2 months before he did die, and I'm glad I made that call because he was Rush Limbaugh. And the reason I can't watch it from Rush Limbaugh the third's grave is because he's buried in my hometown of St. Louis, same burg that Perry Como sings about, to open this broadcast each and every time. Narrowcast, I mean. So Rush isn't going to be in Cape Girardeau, but I intend to be, and I hope there's no clouds over southeast Missouri that day because it'll be great to see that total eclipse of the sun because, again, I don't know that I'm going to be around for the one in August 2024, but I intend to be there on the 8th of April, 2024. And did I say 2024? It was the one in August is going to be 2045. Getting my dates all confused here. Well, there's a lot of digits to keep track of here on the Narrowcast. But this one in 2024, just 230 days from today, the 21st of August, 2023, which is the 6th anniversary of the eclipse across America on the 17th of August 2017. Got them all right this time. This one coming up, I intend to be there in southeast Missouri for, and you can see it wherever you want, from Texas up to Maine, but you owe it to yourself to see it from one of those states in the path. And if I've done my job here on the Radioactive Take, I've now given you reason, if nothing else, to further research total eclipses of the sun and maybe be inspired as I was as a little child, just reading about them. And by the way, I don't know how long you hope to live to be, but I would like to see 100. That'll be in 2054 if I make it. But you're not going to be able to see total eclipses of the sun forever because you may not realize this, but any basic astronomy class usually mentions, and mine did at Boston University, this important fact, and that is every year we find that the moon is about 1.5 inches further in its orbit than it was the previous year. And what does that mean? Well, that means that sometime around the year 563 million AD, the moon's going to be too far to fully cover the disk of the sun. So if you're one of these that, like Ray Kurzweil, or Kurzweil, however it's pronounced, that futurist we keep hearing about, the guy that talks about the singularity, well, he says immortality is not beyond the grasp of humanity. He says that by the time the singularity hits, medical science will have advanced so far that some people will be immortal. So maybe there's people viewing this very Narrowcast at this very moment over WBQS. There may be some immortal types that'll still be around in the year 563 million AD. And they'll find themselves, if they've passed on every opportunity to see a total eclipse of the sun in the meantime, and there'll be a lot of them. Again, they happen pretty much every year or so, but on faraway places on the planet, in faraway places on the planet. And They're hard to get to very often, but if somebody lives to that year so far down the road, well, even then, even that immortal person will not be able to see total eclipses of the sun anymore because the moon will be just too far in its orbit. So hit it and get it while you can. Most specifically, on Monday, the 8th of April, 2024. And on Tuesday, the 22nd of August, 2023, we'll do this little broadcast soiree we call the Radioactive Take all over again over WBQS Radio, a talk radio station that doesn't exist, but for my money, will someday. In the meantime, thanks for viewing, and we'll see you tomorrow on the Narrowcast. Over and out from Florida.